Hello everyone and welcome to this first episode of Moocall's Tent Talk series. Unfortunately, due to COVID-19, the National Ploughing Championships for 2020 has been cancelled. However, we've decided that we want to put our own approach on this, and it's something that we haven't done before. So what we've decided to do is bring the exhibitor to the farmer, and we're going to be hosting several, over the course of the days of the ploughing, we're going to be hosting several different webinars for everyone to tune in, and it'll, highlight different things. We'll be going through our products, the history of, the National Ploughing Championships and what that has done for Irish agriculture. And also, just in this first episode, we'll be taking a look on the agricultural sector and how COVID-19 has affected it. So, and just to introduce myself briefly, my name is Stephen Fagan and I'm head of our operations and design at Moocall. So the topics on discussion today, I will be looking at, as you can see here, the initial impact that COVID-19 has had on Irish agriculture throughout 2020 so far. Also, I'll be reviewing the beef sector and the challenges it has faced. I'll be discussing the dairy industry and how it has came through this ongoing pandemic. We'll also take a glance at the new perspective that consumers are having on agriculture over the past number of months. And finally, just touching on mental health on farm and how a little bit of communication to whether it be people in isolation can go a long way for someone. And then we'll just look ahead at the times for farmers post-COVID-19. So what has the initial impact of COVID-19 brought to us? Well, back in January when Asia started seeing the first spells of the virus, I don't think anyone knew at that point where things were going to go, but coming into February, it seemed only a matter of time before the virus became a worldwide pandemic. As March approached, we did see consumers becoming more aware of the extent of the coronavirus, and as it spread globally in such a short space of time. This did drive an increased demand on the food sector due to panic buying by the public, which is, looking back, quite an unnecessary approach made by many. But look, you can understand where people felt where they may have been quite vulnerable. As lockdown measures were introduced then by the government, Ireland began to feel the impact heavily. We had events cancelled and businesses then forced to close temporarily. So all the measures that were brought in were in the interest of public health and safety. However, it did leave to the food sector taking a huge slam, particularly, the retail food demand did rise, but food service demand significantly dropped due to the closures in the likes of hospitality and other workplace environments. Then by now, I suppose all the struggles that retail outlets began to have brought about a negative impact on the ag sector, and the prices for farmers that they were getting their produce at then began to plummet. So just here, I suppose agriculture did begin to feel a pinch from this. In addition, by April, people were on pandemic supports. This resulted in consumer spending falling due to the restrictions, which led to a drive towards cheaper alternative food options. So any unsold food stocks began to build up and either become wasted on farms or within industry. So from here, we could see that the food markets were becoming a lot more overstocked. In the short run, farmers weren't able to adjust quickly to reduce their supply in response to the lower demand. Understandably, farmers have been planning for months in advance on their stock and what they can produce. So it's not the flick of a switch to reduce this amount of produce. From here, it kicked in a negative price adjustments for the beef and for both beef and dairy industries. Looking forward, until the supply versus demand balance has returned to near normal, the food markets will remain overstocked as a result of it. But with the accumulation of excessive stock all across the supply chains, there will be a delay in prices recovering, especially in both the ag and food sectors. So just to take a look on the beef sector, the number one shock that Ireland took was in relation to the beef exports. This was hit, and it's a key driver of the beef market turndown. So once we began to see restaurants and bars and hotels, work canteens, etc. close, this is where we've seen the food industry completely shut down. And after further caused further headaches earlier on in the year, I suppose, more so than anything. The Irish beef industry, obviously, for being largely dependent on this market, felt the blow in a massive way. As I mentioned, retail had some increased demand due to the panic buy-in and the volume of consumers either out of work or now working from home, but it was not even close to replacing the amount of lost, produce in the food service industry, especially on the more expensive cuts of meat. That would be purchased in the likes of restaurants or hotels. And just on a last point here that I have, the total kill in Ireland did spiral down by more than 5% cumulatively throughout the year in comparison to 2019's figures, for example. And it is estimated also by the Department of Agriculture in Ireland that 30 to 40,000 cattle that would have been slaughtered between the likes of March and May were held off being sold by farmers at that time. So this was as a result of a price shock and the lack of demand by the factories at the time. Beef farmers need our support at this point. So what we did see was temporary closures of big meat purchasers such as McDonald's and supermarkets and the like, which was a huge blow to the sector, as obviously, they're some of the biggest buyers of meat here. The food service industry across Europe went into a complete shutdown phase, which meant a huge decrease in the demand from other commercial buyers. Your retail demand, as I mentioned, was way up, but it was not even close to making up for the shortfall. The retail demand was brought from your supermarkets just due to the upsurge in the likes of home cooking and consumption. In June, then we had Minister Creed that had announced just before the end of his term that there would be a €50 million beef finisher support scheme. Which again, before Calery's resignation as Minister for Agriculture, he introduced the applications, which would commence then at the end of August until the 9th of September. The details of the scheme was aimed to provide vital support to farmers for up to nearly 42,000 farmers that were adversely impacted by COVID-19. Now, so just to take a look on the dairy sector, as we entered 2020, the potential for a further increase in the Irish milk production was already very evident. On the assumption of normal weather conditions, even without the increase of milk yield, the continuing increase in the size of the national dairy herd would be sufficient enough to increase the national milk production by at least 5%. So I suppose as COVID-19 set in, the fear was if any processor went down, the knock-on consequences, would have been unimaginable for the entire industry, really. The Irish dairy market is a volatile one, and the Irish industry has proved resilient when faced with other challenges like this in the past. Post-COVID-19, it is unlikely to be so far-reaching that it would significantly affect the demand in the dairy industry with, the likes of schools and restaurants and other types of workplaces reopening again. However, I suppose the big questions are how long and how low will the prices go, and also how will the long-term impact on the global economy be. So look, I suppose following on from that, look at the Irish milk production is in a great place. Irish dairy is the engine of rural Ireland and the national economy here. So, the dairy cow population has continued to increase in 2020, and a further increase in milk production is likely of about 3 to 4% by the end of 2020. So, as I said, Irish dairy is in a better place than others to survive. Much of, the production goes into butter, cheese, skim milk, sports nutritional products, etc. Whereas farmers in other parts of the EU are at the mercy of, unfortunately, the fresh food market, which is practically collapsed for them. So since the COVID-19 crisis began, sales in shops have grown by over a fifth. But even where this is welcomed, it just doesn't compensate for the 80+% drop in sales that has occurred elsewhere in the food market. So just one thing I wanted to touch on was just on consumers and, the new perspective that the COVID-19 has brought them to have just on the Irish ag industry and just the ag industry as a whole, rather. I suppose the agricultural sector has entered some challenging times, and it's mainly due to the concerns around the growing misconceptions that part of society has. However, I do believe that, should farmers be able to adapt to the latest technologies which are becoming more and more available to them, we can be more optimistic for a more positive future. Um, Look, I think ultimately agriculture eventually will need to become infinitely sustainable. I think everyone can agree that as long as there's humans on the planet and need food, farming will be at the core of that sustainability. Um, but I suppose, on the other hand, in order for that to happen, farms need to be viable. They need to make a profit, and without farmers advancing themselves year after year, you will see zero sustainability overall. Soil, water, greenhouse gas balances, they're obviously all major factors and play major roles in that. But viability is the most critical. Um, COVID has put a large amount of pressure on food distribution channels globally. I feel that there's an opportunity for COVID to have a wider conversation about the importance of agriculture and for the greater population to connect with agriculture in a more closer way. The hard work and dedication that's put in by farmers in the face of a public that can be somewhat disconnected from the primary producer, it just needs to be seen at the forefront. Um, I think that the next 30 years are going to be the most important for farming and for agriculture as a whole. You've got a dramatic increase in the global population. With by 5050, they're expecting between 9 to 10 billion people on the planet. So with the land base obviously decreasing as a result of that, food production has to rise and meet the demand that's going to be put on it, or else you're going to have much more pressure put on the exporting nations globally. Again, just coming back to mental health, it's one thing that's can be overlooked in a sense, and especially the last number of months, the last 6 months of COVID-19, has seen farmers more so in isolation, and has seen people in general in more so of an isolation situation where they mightn't see people for longer periods of time. So it's a topic that I just wanted to make further awareness about. As the well-being of a farmer is so important. I feel that there has been an increased awareness on mental health during these challenging times, but it could be better. We need to create a sense of community and stay connected to all our neighbours and friends as much as possible. There's no doubt that farming as a whole is a demanding job, but when you combine the long hours and physical labour, there will be that mental drain, and you can find it difficult to keep the contact there. Obviously at present there's a lot of economic uncertainty, and some farmers are financially vulnerable. So I'd urge you to keep people nearby, especially during these times. Just with regards to isolation, it's definitely being caused through social distancing, and it can be worse for people who are already suffer from the likes of anxiety or severe levels of stress. So it's ensured to combat that by continuing to reach out to family members and others. Don't allow yourself to become more and more distant, because it's just not going to help. I suppose the three main things to be thinking about, and where do you start with that, is to talk to people, ask them, and listen. Those are the three core elements. By doing these, you can really make a big impact on not only yourself, but someone nearby to you or someone around you. Talk to people that are around you, ask how others are doing, listen to people, and allow them to take the weight off their shoulders if they're having any struggles. There can be a lack of support, especially during the likes of calving season or harvesting, where it's a lot busier. So it is easy to forget about your own mental well-being. So I just urge you not to ignore that. In recent times, there has been a renewed sense of appreciation for farmers. So hopefully this will continue to grow. And in layman's terms, I'd advise to shop local and support local farmers. So lastly then, I just want to go through just on an outlook for the times ahead for agriculture. I suppose, look, the big question is, has the worst of COVID-19 passed for us? You know, I suppose at this stage, it's very difficult to call. And, you know, we have the health experts out there. They're advising us on a weekly, if not daily basis on what to do and what not to do. So my only advice is to continue supporting that for them. For beef farmers, look, at slaughter rates are down across Europe, but look, they'll have to come back. Animals will need to be killed in order for farmers to get their cash flows. For dairy farmers, we haven't seen milk going into intervention really at all yet. But in saying that, there is some unsold product out there, and they will need to go somewhere. We need to stabilise the economy really as much as possible in terms of policy. There's no denying that obviously COVID-19 has had an exceptional shock to the ag sector, if not other sectors. But I think it's fair to say that overall the economy was performing very strongly up until the end of February. So it will take a lot of time and change just to get us back to that point. Finally, just on Teagasc, they did a report that did conclude on the total income being reduced on Irish agriculture in 2020, just as a result of COVID-19, and that was ranging from between the likes of 700 million to as much as 1.6 billion. So clear as day, you know, it has taken a huge hit for on-farm income, particularly more so in the beef sector. While the worst case impact of the virus on farmers in Ireland appear to have been avoided, you know, farm incomes in 2020 are still likely to be a lot lower, and have anticipated this throughout the onset of the year. So then, just on conclusion, I'd just like to thank you all for listening to this first episode of Moocall's 10 Talk series. We will be hosting a Q&A on our Instagram page just after this. So if anyone has any questions, please do feel free to reach out to us, and we'll address every question accordingly. Finally, for any further information just on our products, please give us a call or visit our website at www.moocall.com for more information. Thank you, and talk soon.